Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness. I can't believe we're back again.
I know, it's gone so quick.
I know, and we have a lot of ground to cover today. It's going to be blowing your hair back probably.
My hair was blown back last week, so
Yeah.
So it's kind of permanently that way now, Peg.
I sort of feel that way too, you know. Reading this material has been so startling in some ways, and it's taken so much thought and reflection to unpack it, because it's really so profound and also very densely packed, I'd say. So I think it's good we at least have a week in between where we can sort of sit with it and see what's coming up for folks. So I wanted to double check and see if you had any particular questions about the sutra that we covered the first two classes. I know it's kind of a blitz tour, but I wanted you to have enough of an overview so that when you read the sutra, you go, oh yeah, this is that part, or this is that part. So did that help at all, getting a little bit of an overview of it? Yeah, Kim.
I'm curious about something that Buddha seemed to use logical rhetoric, rhetorical arguments for his position, but then to convince I don't know how to say his name, the guy with the D,
Devadatta.
Yeah, to convince him, he used these magical, I see them as pretty magical power, not the rhetoric and logic again.
Right.
And I guess maybe it's just skillful means to find but Buddha never said, I mean, what he did, any logician could do, like this wouldn't work out because then this would happen. It wasn't like something he had experienced, but rather something just his logical training had taught him, like a mathematician would prove things, but didn't really experience them. Oh, Susan might disagree, but
I disagree.
Okay.
But he used logic to explain them to people, the things that he experienced and the things that he.
Oh, okay.
So that they could understand. You know, as he said in the beginning, he didn't want to teach because what he had was so subtle and complex and profound, people wouldn't get it, and then they would be disrespectful, and that would be vexing for him. He didn't mind, I don't think, if they disrespected him, but he didn't want them to disrespect the knowledge that he was bringing them. So
he knew it beyond the logic.
Oh yeah, and you'll see that in what we talk about today.
Okay.
Especially, yeah, he was a very skillful rhetorician, I would say, for each kind of person that he was addressing. So when he was addressing his disciples about sophisticated levels of consciousness, he would use certain methods of explaining and describing. And when he was talking to householders or villagers, he used other methods. And so in the case of his dad, his father was there at the funeral. His father wasn't a particularly sophisticated disciple, and neither were all the villagers who were gathered around wondering about these questions. So I think his explanations are quite plain and direct. And he's not in an argument. He's not in the middle of an argument. He's explaining something that really is, his father has asked him in anguish, basically. What's the purpose of all these offerings? What really happens after people die? So, and we can imagine that at this point, the Buddha was probably at least in his 40s. probably 40s or 50s. So his dad was getting on, right? His dad was getting elderly and probably had some of these questions about his own end. So that's what I'm suspecting. So I thought the Buddha's explanation in that sutra was very clear and very to the point. And it wasn't filled with a lot of esoteric, mystical language like he might have had with his disciples in talking about different levels of consciousness. So that was my sense. That's why I think it's a really good, and I actually gave it to someone who has no Buddhist background whatsoever, but who had recently lost someone that was very dear to them. And they were so reassured by it. They felt so much sense of grounding in it. So I gave them a lot of comfort. Anything else left over from last week that you guys want to ask or Janie?
I listened to the recording and did the homework. I was just wondering, did you want us to read the translation of the from the first homework from the first class? There was a summary of the reading, and then there was a translation. I mean, yeah, I think it was a translation.
You should have gotten it in email, that PDF.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just, yeah, I did. I saved it and then I went back to look at the homework, and it was like 30 pages, but then it was separated by the first half and then the summary and then the translation. I just wasn't sure if we were supposed to read
the translation. The part at the beginning is really for scholars. Where did this come from? How did we find it? What is it connected to? And a little bit of Tibetan background that isn't really necessary for diving into the sutra itself. The translation most key.
Oh, okay. Well, I did it, but without having read, I'll go back and read the translation.
Yeah, no, the assignment was to do it without looking at the translation. So, so that you decide, how would you answer the Buddha's father? What would to those questions? Before you read what the Buddha said, what would you say out of your own understanding, out of your own perceptions and belief systems? So, and then to compare sort of what the Buddha answered and to think about what makes sense to you, right? So, so that the whole point was really like, how does this compare with my my beliefs about what's going on, and what is it that makes sense for me? Yeah. So yeah. So is that helpful?
Yeah, I'll just go back and do that. And
yeah,
I couldn't come last week because I had made a commitment to go somewhere with a friend.
It's a short sutra. It's not really very long. And part of it is explaining using similes. The whole last section is explaining using similes, and then the Buddha explaining why he's using the similes, why the 8 similes were needed. So in the reading for today, there's a simile also. And they ultimately you end up having to use similes and metaphors, or you're not going to be able to convey the heart of what these teachings really are. So, yeah. Any other leftovers? Yeah, Sheila.
I was struck particularly, and I think the more I thought about this after I reacted the way I did, the more I think it comes from my background in the Southern Baptist Church, where everything is absolutely, this is the answer, and that, you have to believe these things. I think I was surprised at the certainty that the Buddha answered these questions with such, this is, this is what happens. And at first I was very put off by that sort of rigid, almost doctrinal sort of part of that sutra. But then I sat with it and realized that was sort of coming more from my background than it is approaching it with an open mind, the way that I've been practicing now. So, but that was kind of interesting to me to see that reaction in myself.
Yeah, and that was the reaction that Devadatta had and the villager had, like, who are you?
Right. Right.
So exactly, that's exactly the reaction. And that's why it's in the sutra, right? Is to as a way to show, like, people didn't just accept this on face value. They challenged him. And and as you'll see when we talk today about all of this, what's asked is not belief, but to keep an open, flexible mind and not be in denial. So denial is another form of rigid thinking, right?
Right.
So that's all that's really needed, is to say, I'm not going to deny this out of hand. Could be possible, right? And the more it sort of matches your insight or understanding, the more you start to see it's the explanation that makes the most sense, actually. So that's what happened for me, is I'm like, in Zen, we don't talk about this, and the breakup of the body, it's the end of everything, which is kind of a misunderstanding even of Zen, as we saw from, Baizhang and the fox. Right, sort of a misunderstanding even in Zen, but some people do hold that understanding. So yeah, but that's perfectly understandable. That especially people who have been in a really dogmatic environment, to see this as some sort of dogma. The Buddha's naming what he's naming. You're free to believe it or not believe it or whatever, So, but at least we ask, keep an open mind to the possibility, and don't shut yourself off to it. And you'll see why today when we talk about denial of this. Yeah, Susan.
Peg, I know you have a lot to cover. And so if this is kind of tangential, feel free to label it as such. But I was talking to a friend about this class and some of the ideas in it. And she asked what seemed like a very basic question, which is, what's the difference between karma and nature versus nurture? And I don't know that I had a really good answer for her, but in thinking about what influences us, who we are. So I just would love to.
In today's, that's a big section that will, yes.
No, okay.
We'll be able to answer that question. And
did we read it? I don't remember reading about. Okay.
No, not some reading that you did. It's something that I'm going to be talking about.
Okay.
So, and if for any reason you feel you can't answer that question at the end of it, let me know, and I'll give at least my perspective.
Okay. Right? That sounds great.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to do today is really give you sort of selected excerpts from Analavo's book, Rebirth, which I talked about, Rebirth in Early Buddhism, right? And current research. This book is so dense and in many ways scholarly. And I didn't advise you to buy it because there's a big chunk of it. Let's see if I can say this here. So he reviews and explains the teachings of the Buddha on rebirth and karma found in the Pali Canon and the Chinese parallel texts, the Agamas. So that's the first part of the book. The second part of the book, he explains the various debates on rebirth from the Buddha's time in ancient India, in China during the early imperial period, and in modern times. So he's looking at these different debates that have arisen, and it's kind of uncanny how the current debates just basically mirror the earliest debates, even in the Buddha's time. So in the third part, he reviews some of the evidence that, as he says, is considered supportive of rebirth. He's very even-handed. He carefully avoids taking a position on this evidence himself, but he's encouraging the reader to use it to keep an open mind. And some of it is sort of a capsule summary of various kinds of research into this. In the fourth part of the book, he goes into greater detail about one of those cases, and this is a big chunk of the book, who, while still very young, could recite in Pali long sutras of the Buddha's teachings. Because this is such a substantial part of the book, I didn't recommend purchasing it because it's very technical and hard to follow, even for me. And on the other hand, the first three parts of the book are quite fascinating. So it's up to you. I'm going to give you the sort of the meat of what he's talking about as a way to introduce you to it. Basically, when we talk about this topic, it has two parts: the aspect of birth and how we come into being, and the aspect of death and what might go on beyond. Where did we come from before we were born, and where do we go after we die? So if anything, quote, goes on between lives, what is it? So this is the open question in our class, right? So in section 1, he's talking about the early Buddhist doctrine of rebirth. So I'm going to give you, sort of an academic explanation of how in the early teachings of the Buddha, this was framed, because it's quite different from how it came to be interpreted later. This was an oral transmission, but in case you think that it's like a sort of a game of telephone, oral transmission was socially engineered and corrected. So people came together, they recited what they had memorized, they corrected each other in order to affirm sort of the canonical teachings. And this was a fairly robust way to preserve and protect and transmit the teachings. So much so that when print came into being, the elders resisted putting the Buddha's teachings into print because they would be subject to some kind of modification in print or in later printing. So in section 1, he's talking about this early Buddhist doctrine, and it is entirely dependent on this concept of dependent arising, which you're very familiar with in terms of the 12, the 12-fold chain, it's sometimes called, of dependent origination. But for those of you who haven't really studied this, I can highly recommend Joanna Macy's wonderful Mutual Causality in Buddhism and General Systems Theory. Again, somewhat academic, but really, really clarifying. In any event, these links, and they're variably sometimes listed as 5 or 9 or 10 links. So it's clear that these particular items are not the issue. The issue is how things are conditioned on each other. So in the typical way it's taught, the first is ignorance. The second is volitional formations. I know what I can do. I can share my screen and you can see my map. You want to see my map? Okay. All right. I'll do that. And then we can be looking at it together. Okay. Okay. So here we are. We're up here with the 12 links. Oops. Which you can now see over there on the right, right? I'm going to move this a little bit closer so I can see actually these things. Okay. So often it's helpful for people to see the map anyway, because they can see sort of where we're going. So these are the 12 links: ignorance, volitional formations, that is some kind of volition, consciousness, name and form, 6 senses, contact, feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, birth, old age, and death. Now, each of these things is dependent on the others, right? So the origins of dukkha. He's using this explanation of paticca samuppada specifically to talk about dukkha, which it seems he did as a counter to the early Vedic teachings, which would list things in terms of recurring rebirth in this cycle of and attachment, in this cycle of attachment to present existence. Okay, so the conditionality is expressed as because there's this, that is. Because this arises, that arises. Without this, that is not. Without this, that does not arise. So you can think about that in connection with some present situation in your own experience. It's much more difficult with social situations, poverty, for example, where causes and conditions are inevitably multiplied. Even in your relationship with one other person, there are multiple causes and conditions for the quality of relating, right? The causes and conditions that the other person brings, and the causes and conditions that you bring, and the environmental causes and conditions that surround you. So, but this is the conditionality. It's not this causes this. It's really important to know that. It's dependent, a kind of dependent origination. This depends on that. So linear causality is one of the things that Joanna Macy talks about and teaches is an inaccurate way to think about this kind of causality. It's emergent and independent upon multiple causes and conditions. Because this is, that is. Because this arises, that arises. So then the counter to that, as the Buddha worked it backward, was without this, that is not. Without this, that does not arise. So because there is birth, death is. Because birth arises, death arises. Without birth, death is not. Without birth arising, this does not arise. Death does not arise, right? Hold on. Correct this. So you can think about this, the way causes and conditions get established. Some of them are inherent in the environment. Some of them are through your own intention. Some of them are through the agency of other people. So as Analavo says, in later interpretations of the 12-fold chain, sometimes they taught it as something that unfolds over 3 consecutive lifetimes, that 12-fold chain. Or it was also taught that it unfolds in each mind moment. And Analavo says these aren't mutually exclusive views, they're complementary. Both might be true. So in the early Buddhist teachings, the purpose of practice is to emerge from the predicament of being afflicted by dukkha. So, which we know of as the quality of something being painful, stressful, or upsetting. So that's the goal. That's the purpose of practice in early. So much later, of course, in the Mahayana tradition, the purpose of practice will come to be the path of the bodhisattva. So not to somehow attain awakening and escape this cycle of rebirth, but to return in order to fulfill a vow for the liberation of beings. But in this early Buddhist teachings, that's not the goal. So there's a strange mystery about this 12-fold chain in that when it's explained that consciousness conditions name and form, and name and form conditions consciousness. It seems like we're caught in a loop, right? So we want to talk a little bit about that strange loop, which is sort of mysterious in the middle of that chain. So it says, name and form is dependent on consciousness. Consciousness is dependent on name and form. Name and form conditions consciousness, and consciousness conditions name and form. And I'm like, wait, when I'm reading this, how can that possibly be? How can they have this reciprocal relationship when we're talking about a 12-fold chain? So here's sort of early definitions. Consciousness is the mind's ability to be conscious of something. Form represents the material side of experience. We know that. Name stands for the functions of mind apart from consciousness, not including consciousness. So here's where this comes in. Name and form. Okay, form is the material side of appearance. It's this body, right? Name is the functions of the mind apart from consciousness, and they come together. So they're responsible for the coming into being of name and the formation of concepts and how we refer to and name things mentally or verbally and categorize them. This is the term for that. And so name includes, this was really new to me. Name includes these aspects: feeling, perception, intention, contact, attention. So feeling is that, as we all know, that hedonic tone. Something is pleasant, painful, or neutral. Even an amoeba has this experience. Something is pleasant, unpleasant, or painful. Even an amoeba will move up a food gradient, So perception, so we immediately have the experience of something as pleasant, painful, or neutral. Perception is the matching of experience with concepts. And so therefore cognition and recognition. So we have this experience and we immediately start to perceive some concepts that map onto either a prior experience or some projection. Intention, this is the purposive dimension, which reacts to experience or its potential. And this is the root of karma. So we'll talk more about this later. But that intention is the root of karma, because you're going to have a purpose. And you're going to take action, some kind of reaction. Contact is the conjunction of the other factors in experience coming together in a particular time and space instant, right? But this is a flow, not a series of discrete moments, not like, beads on a necklace that are somehow strung together. These factors are flowing and they're coming into conjunction and flowing. And attention is responsible for noticing and observing a particular aspect out of whatever situation is experienced. So that's what our attention does. It singles something out. It, sort of puts a boundary around it against the background. It foregrounds it. And so it notices and observes a particular aspect of it. Okay, this is the summary. The range of name and form as the conceptual and material aspects of experience encompasses the whole gamut of what is experienced by consciousness. So all those things, name and form, that's the whole thing. Name as well as form depend not only on each other, but also on consciousness. The conceptual and material properties of an object require consciousness in order to be experienced, right? If we didn't have consciousness, we wouldn't experience them. In turn, consciousness depends on name and form as that which provides the content of what consciousness is aware of. We're conscious of something, right? So this reciprocal conditioning of consciousness and name and form presents a basic matrix of experience, a continuous interplay between consciousness on the one hand and name and form on the other that builds up the world of experience. So does that make sense? This world of experience gets built up through these factors coming together and our consciousness of it. So they depend on each other. So name and form, if we're not conscious of it, it's non-existent to us. So this is what I used to ask my students: is there anything whatsoever that can exist without your consciousness of it? And so that totally freaked them out. And it freaked them out because they like to believe there's a reality out there, and then their minds are sort of apprehending that reality. But as the more they struggled to think about it, the more they realized, galaxies, well, they only exist for me if I'm conscious of them, right? Or have some name for them or some concept of them. So it doesn't mean there's nothing out there in the world. It means it has no existence for us. And in turn, consciousness depends on name and form as that which provides the content. So we can say, this is a newspaper article. This is a person. We are constantly interacting with this name and form matrix. Okay, how does this fit in with our Buddhist teaching of non-self? Oh, Chris, you had a question.
So if aspects of existence don't exist unless we're aware of them, that implies that each of us is in a separate universe of perception and construction. How does that work?
How does that work? Right? Every time you meet someone, you're encountering another universe. It's a whole universe. Up until that point, you've sort of believed that your universe was complete, right? Then you meet a new person, it's another universe. It's a universe you were completely unaware of. It's all their likes and dislikes, the people that they know, the things that they've learned, the experiences they've had, only some tiny fraction of which you're ever going to know about, right? So there's some mutual exploration, but you understand there's a whole vast array of things in that person's universe that you'll never know, right? So, but the parts that we can explore together are kind of fascinating. There's another whole universe. So there's another potential there for exploration of experience that is not familiar to you, that is not already known to you.
Okay.
I think this is one of the signal advantages of humans, is that they can share their experience in that way. So when my dog meets another dog, she doesn't, no matter how long they spend together, she doesn't know anything about that dog's puppyhood. She doesn't know anything about that dog's training or background or anything, right? And there's no way that dog can actually tell her about that, right? And so they're always discovering things about each other in the present moment. Like, we're both going to bark at the mailman together. So my dog taught my neighbor's dog to bark. He had never barked. And the FedEx guy came, she started barking like a nut, and he found his voice. But not because she said to him, you should bark when these guys come. Right? Just by sort of modeling that behavior. Right? So there isn't any like predictive teaching, like if anybody comes to the door, be sure you bark. Right? But humans can do that. Humans can say, if anybody comes to the door, whatever. So this is this kind of interesting thing about getting another universe. We have so many opportunities for exploration. Most of us bail on the operations of exploration together. There's a lot of intimacy in it. That's getting more into interpersonal stuff. So this conditioning, reciprocal conditioning between consciousness and name and form, is what Analavo says explains the continuity of one's experiences during life without an unchanging agent. These things are constantly reinforcing each other, right? But it doesn't mean that there has to be a self in the middle of it. It thereby functions as the counterpart to the early Buddhist teachings of not self, Anatta, according to which there is no permanent entity in any aspect of experience. That does not mean you are empty. It just means you are a flow. So Gombrich pointed out all the fuss and misunderstanding can be avoided if one inserts the word unchanging so that the two-word English phrase becomes no unchanging self rather than no self, which some people find negating, right? So it's just no unchanging self, no core thing that that stays the same. So the assertion, he says, of the doctrine of not self does not imply a denial of anything subjective in experience. It only means that the subjective experience is a process devoid of a permanent entity, that it is a changing stream of consciousness that depends on a changing process of name and form, and vice versa. So he then talks about some later interpretations that he thinks are mistaken. So early Buddhist thought does not postulate that all phenomena are of only momentary existence and disappear as soon as they have appeared. There's some later interpretations that talk about that. All phenomena have only a momentary existence and disappear as soon as they've appeared. Instead, in its early Buddhist usage, consciousness refers to a continuously changing process of being conscious. So later tradition goes further and envisions consciousness as a staccato-like series of micro moments of being conscious. And sometimes I think people can get that idea from Zen practice, where we're talking about being in the present moment, as though it's a self-contained thing, right? Each of these micro moments passing away immediately on having come into existence. This form of presentation makes the continuity of conscious experience more difficult to appreciate. Instead, it looks like ... right? ... moments. So he's really advocating for this view of a continuous stream, a continuous flow of consciousness and name and form mutually influencing each other. So he says, by way of illustration, instead of using the noun consciousness, which would give the misleading impression of a permanent entity, to convey the early Buddhist position, one might speak of just of being conscious, thereby better conveying a sense of process. Only in later times does this process come to be seen as a series of infinitesimally brief moments that at high speed arise and disappear on the spot. So now I'm going to give you one of my pet peeves. This is one of my ongoing concerns about our language, our tendency to make nouns out of processes, and especially processes without any fixed substance, which is all of them. Photosynthesis, marriage, cancer, lawyer, forest, workplace. None of these are solid objects, yet we make them into nouns. So once that's accomplished, we can generalize and make solid and make predictions and explanations as though we know what we're really talking about. We can set about making definitions that set the parameters of what's included, what's excluded, and most of all, fix the meaning of that process in some static way. So we can perform certain operations on these processes when we turn them into nouns, but it does a kind of violence to the actual experiencing, right? Okay, so dependent arising and rebirth. So how does all this dependent origination have anything to do with rebirth? And there are two aspects of this. We'll look at birth and we'll look at death. So in birth, the Buddha said, Ananda, in dependence upon consciousness, there is name and form. What is the meaning of this? If consciousness did not enter the mother's womb, would there be name and form? Ananda replied, no. So it depends on consciousness. Our coming into being depends on consciousness. In other words, at the moment of conception, the same basic principle is in operation that also governs continuity during the life of the individual. This principle involves a reciprocal conditioning between consciousness and name and form. Of these interrelated processes, it's the process of consciousness that enters the mother's womb, so to speak. A form of presentation, this is really important, that shows that the early Buddhist conception of rebirth is more complex than a simple mind-body duality. These things are reciprocally conditioning each other, name and form and consciousness. And then the Buddha said, if consciousness were to depart from the womb, if the infant were to be destroyed, would name and form come to grow? Ananda replied, no. So these things have a dependency on each other. Conversely, he says, at death, when the body will come to be bereft of vitality and heat, consciousness will depart. In this way, consciousness appears to be what provides the transition from one body to another. Or to be precise, instead of consciousness, one might speak of being conscious to preserve the nuance of a changing process. So you saw the similes that the Buddha used for this in the sutra. This role of consciousness, or of being conscious as a transition from one life to the next, finds confirmation in a discourse in the Samyutta Nikaya and its parallels. So the question here is where a monk who's just died might have been reborn. And the parallel versions, he says, agree to referring to what could have been reborn as his consciousness. Such rebirth can, according to early Buddhist cosmology, involve a variety of forms. Besides human and animal rebirth, it can also take the form of rebirth in various celestial realms, and thereby occur with a kind of bodily form that differs substantially from the material body of humans and animals. So these forms, for example, can travel great distances at the speed of thought, or move through walls or things like that. So that rebirth might take that kind of form. Even so, even if you were reborn into a heavenly realm, you still age, you still die at the end of it. It's an exceedingly long lifetime, but it's not liberation. So intention. Here's what's important in thinking about this in terms of death. What one thinks relates to an underlying tendency in the mind that in turn forms the object for the establishing of consciousness. What we think about establishes our consciousness, right? Becomes the object of our consciousness. This then leads on to the dependent arising of birth and so on. If one gives rise to deluded conceptualizations, these underlying tendencies form an object for the establishment of consciousness. So you can think about it. Jealousy, anger, grasping. Because there's an object for the establishment of consciousness, there is future birth, old age, disease, and death. So that's the cycle. So I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. So how does this really work? So he's talking about rebirth and underlying tendencies. These underlying tendencies are called anusaya. They're latent dispositions in the mind. So this passage in the sutra relates these tendencies underlying one's deluded thought processes to rebirth via their providing a basis for the continuity of consciousness in samsara. So these tendencies are considered to be already present in a baby, even though a baby would not yet be in a position to display the corresponding mental states and actions. For example, he says, the Buddha said, a young tender infant sleeping on its back has no notion of sensual pleasure in its mental faculty. How could its mind become entangled in sensual desire? Yet, because of the nature of its underlying tendency, one speaks of its underlying tendency to sensual desire. So that's what will, begin to blossom as he ages and has life experiences. A young, tender infant sleeping on its back has no notion of a living being in its mental faculty. How could its mind become entangled in hatred? Yet, because of the nature of its underlying tendency, one speaks of its underlying tendency to hatred. So these underlying tendencies are qualities of the consciousness that is what makes the transition from one life to another. Judging from these and other parallel passages, Analavo says, the underlying tendencies accompany consciousness at the time of conception. In other words, consciousness at the time of conception is not seen as a tabula rasa, a blank slate, but rather carries with it, in a way the early discourses don't really further specify, imprints from the past life. You might think of them as karmic seeds. This type of residual memory, if one may call it such, continues from one life to another. From an early Buddhist perspective, it thereby becomes an important source of influence on the newborn, in addition to hereditary traits resulting from the parents and influences exerted by the environment. So this is the answer to your question, Susan, right? There are these karmic tendencies that carry forward in addition to the traits that come from the parents, hereditary traits, and the influences exerted by the environment.
So it's karma is neither nature or nurture. It's outside of.
That's right.
Nature or nurture is the context for karma.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Exactly right. And they are additional influences on the child. Right? So, and this is the wonderful thing about this exposition of karma and its operations, that it's never a linear effect. Karma plays out in the context of our environment, other people, their intentions, their motivations. So it's wrong and harmful to blame people for the bad things that happen to them as karmic consequences of something bad they must have done in the past. I hope that's clear. Because there are other factors that create our experience. And the Buddha was very clear about that. He was asked directly about that. And he said, no, because you can have accidents, you can have people with malign motives, you can have all kinds of conditions that are not in your control. So,
could I ask a question?
Sure.
So my sister was born with spina bifida, and maybe 30 years ago, she was interested in Buddhism, but then she got turned away from it because she felt like her spina bifida was it had been framed as a result of karma from a past life.
Yeah, there's no absolutely know that, or to even think that.
So it's really a product of probably nature, nurture in some combination.
Right. Yeah. So it's a congenital thing that is, may very well have a hereditary component to it. It may have been an accident within the developmental cycle inside the womb,
Right.
that has no karmic bearing.
What kind of thing is a karmic seed then? Like,
so you probably know you have two boys.
Yeah.
Are they like each other?
No.
Yeah. So they came in with certain tendencies. And in the environment they came into, some of those tendencies were amplified. Some of them were maybe suppressed. But you know perfectly well that from the get-go, they had different personalities. Right? And I think psychologists have identified 5 primary factors that you can, even in a very tiny infant, begin to detect, whether they're, more risk averse or more adventurous, whether they prefer to observe, whether they prefer to act. Those kinds of things are evident almost immediately. So those I would think of as karmic tendencies. And then, okay, so maybe there's a child who tends to be reserved and observant and comes into a family where everybody's like, no, you've got to get out and play, make friends, shake hands, and that child starts to be suppressed, right? They're trying to match themselves to something that isn't a fit. So they have all kinds of difficulties as a result of that. Or they might come into a family that's like, he's a quiet one, he's our quiet boy. In which case some other kind of unfolding would happen for that child, right? So the tendency is there, and how it gets realized, and the karmic seeds are there, and how they come into fruition. We'll talk about that in a little bit. That's a very, very complex issue. So anyone who makes a linear, connection is mistaken. So, yeah, and it's sad. It's sad that your sister had that experience of that kind of reflection, because that is certainly not true. And worse, it amplifies the suffering. Why would you do that? No, that's not our vow. So the real question is, given the conditions that you're in, what helps free you? What helps liberate you so that you can live the life that you can live, right? So, yeah, so there's a very bad tendency, and that it's really, you can see it sort of reflected in these sort of pop things like The Secret, which is all about, you can just visualize it and you can bring whatever you want to you. And so then if you have cancer, you brought that somehow, right? And it's just blaming the victim for something you have no idea whether it's the fruit of some past karma 1,000 lifetimes ago, or whether it's a simple accident of nature. So that's what I would tell your friend about the nature and nurture issue. Yes, those things are both creating conditions. And what we see are the product of causes and conditions, some of which we have some control over and some of which we don't. Yeah. Yeah, it's very important. And we'll talk about that when we talk about karma in a minute, and karma and its fruit. But so the important thing to understand is that this continuity doesn't imply some identity. So it's not a completely identical replica of the mental knowledge or the skills or the abilities of the previous person. The previous person could walk, a baby can't walk, right? So it involves a continuity from one life to another that does not imply a complete identity of its earlier and later manifestations. If you think of this as a stream, and I think this was helpful for me, he talks about it as a river, and it's accumulated a lot of debris, right? And it pours out into a lake, and that debris settles out, and the water then continues on in the river, right? So there's a sense of a stream, and it has things caught up in it. And one of the functions of practice is to help that residue filter out, right? That karmic residue, help filter that out. Okay, so Chris, you had a question.
Does all of this say anything about the possibility of memories of previous lives?
Yes,
That's a personal quest. That's a personal question, because I had something that might have been a memory of a past life.
No doubt. So that's the very next thing that Analavo talks about, is recollection of past lives and intermediate existence. So the Buddha, before the Buddha awakened, he had two huge insights. One was his recollection of past lives. So he used the first person pronoun, personal pronoun, to talk about these past lives. In the past, I was this. I ate this, I lived here, this was my name, this is how I died. So it doesn't deny that there's an individualized form of continuity from one birth to another. It only denies that this continuity involves a permanent and unchanging agent. So I formerly arose there with such a given name, such a family name, eating food like this, experiencing pleasure and pain like this. Passing away from there, I was reborn here, dying there, I was reborn here. So Analavo says this is sort of comparable to looking back over your present life and understanding how some experiences had a decisive influence on what one did and has become, right? You've had that sense of, you look back and say, oh, when I did this, or when this happened, it shifted everything, or my life went in a new direction, or it's more obvious in those cases. So presumably being able to recollect one's past lives offers a direct appreciation of how the intentional quality of one's former deeds shapes one's own present. I decided to go to college, and then, as a result, I got this job, and as a result, this career unfolded. This is an influence that continues over the transition from one life to the next, but it is not, as we said, a monocausal thing. It's not like this causes this in some linear way. So once the Buddha had reviewed his previous lives, he began to explore the rebirth, the lives and rebirths of others. So is this just true for everybody? So he explored the passing away and being reborn of other beings. In this way, he was able to ascertain the driving force causing living beings to migrate through the round of births and deaths. They're being propelled onward in accordance with their karmic deeds. So in this sutta, he says, I saw living beings of various types being born and passing away, of good or bad appearances, in good or bad destinies, attractive or ugly, in accordance with their good or bad conduct. So Analavo says the Buddha was able to witness that those who had acted in unwholesome ways were reborn in bad realms of existence, and those who had acted in wholesome ways in good realms of existence. In this way, the vision of rebirth and the vision of the principle of karma are clearly presented as integral aspects of the Buddha's progress to awakening. To really get this, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about karma in a minute. So the intermediate existence. He talks about the actual transition from one life to the next. In early Buddhist thought, this transition appears to involve an intermediate existence. And in fact, one can attain the goal of full awakening in between, which I found kind of fascinating. So in between one life and the next life. And the way it's described by the Buddha, it's just as if iron that is thoroughly ablaze and very hot is hit with a hammer. A burning splinter flies up into the air and while moving upward becomes extinguished. Just like that. Again, it's just as if iron that is thoroughly ablaze and very hot is hit with a hammer. A burning splinter flies up into the air and while moving downward from having been up, becomes extinguished without reaching the ground. So this is the idea that you could have this awakening on your way out immediately after you die, or before rebirth, right? Coming back down into a body. So he gives the flame simile. The transition from one life to another finds comparison in the simile of a flame, which with the support of wind can cross over a distance even without any fuel. We certainly know this, right? And is able to set fire to fuel that is not immediately contiguous to it. Similar to the wind acting as a support for the flame, craving is considered to function as a support for the mind at the time of transition from one life to the next. Unlike the wind, which will abate on its own at some point, as long as craving continues in unawakened beings, immersed in ignorance, it is the bond that binds consciousness to present and future bodies. To be free from this bond requires that ignorance and craving be eradicated. So that's the sense of the, and so my sister was asking me, well, does this happen instantly? That is the transition from one body to another body. Does that happen instantly, or does it happen over a long period of time, or can it happen, do they specify how much time? And I said, time is such an unusual medium in Buddhist teachings. If you're thinking in terms of kalpas, hundreds of millions of years, an instant might be a century, right? It might be a millennium. So that quality, like there's no way that there's a clock running. It's just this sense that there's an intermediate state in between. Okay, the principle of karma. So you'll recall from our list volition, right? And it operates within the network of conditions provided by the other components of name as well, as by the reciprocal conditioning between consciousness and name and form. So you remember those aspects. Hold on here. I'll bring them back. Of feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention. This is, they're all interdependent on each other. So karma in early Buddhist thought refers to such mental volition as well as to intentionally undertaken verbal and bodily deeds. This is really important. This needs to be distinguished from popular usage, in which karma stands for the results, right? Everybody goes, well, that's just karma, you know. So strictly speaking, that usage isn't correct. The appropriate term for the results of karma is vipaka. That's the results of karma. Karma is the volition that's the forward direction, right? The action, the thought, the speech that comes from volition, intention. So in short, karma means action. The doctrine of karma and its fruition proposes that actions, be these mental, verbal, or bodily, tend to have a result. The result is vipaka, of course. Be this in relation to oneself or others, similar to the reciprocal conditioning of consciousness and name and form. Karma as volitional action also applies to the present life just as much as to the transition from one life to another. What it does isn't deterministic. It's actually probabilistic, I would say. If you go to college, it's probabilistic that you will have a more opportunity for a professional career. It's probable, but it's not guaranteed. It's not a linear connection. So Analavo says, to provide a simple example, the fact that my hitting the keys on the computer in front of me produces sentences on the screen could be considered an example of karma and its fruit. The mental action of choosing particular keys has as its result that letters appearing on the screen make up a meaningful sentence. And the ethical quality of my intention leading to these letters expressing a particular idea has its fruition in whatever this part of my writing will eventually convey to the reader. All this exemplifies the basic notion of karma and its fruit. So, what one experiences now is the fruition of past karma in the sense of one's past deeds, but also of factors like bodily disorders, change of climate, or external violence. So this shows that in early Buddhist thought, the results of karma operate within a network of various causes and conditions, right, Susan? Karma does not exercise its influence in a monocausal manner. The doctrine of karma is therefore clearly not deterministic. Instead, one's volitional decisions taken in the present moment are only one factor in a network of interrelated conditions that will influence one's future. The emphasis is often on this factor, however, because it is the one condition amenable to being brought under control through mental training. Right? So this is why this training is important, because you're going to face all these other conditions, but you don't have control over them. So ripening of karma is complex and not something that operates in a monocausal manner. Results do not necessarily immediately follow the cause. So the Buddhist notion that faring on in the round of rebirth extends so far back into the past that a beginning point can't be discerned. This implies that the amount of deeds performed in the past must be staggering, right? Thousands of lives behind you. Since a particular deed in the present need not result in instant fruition, the results of karma someone experiences now could be related to the ripening of some other deed from the past, but not necessarily so, right? The Brahmajala Sutta showcase how various wrong views arose because of recollecting just one previous life. Their presentation implies that just taking into account the previous life is an insufficient basis for drawing conclusions, instead of which a whole range of previous lives would need to be surveyed in order to be able to appreciate the workings of karma. The exact working out of the results of karma is hard to gauge. Only a basic pattern can be discerned, in that evil will eventually have its fruition in painful experience, just as wholesomeness will eventually have pleasant results. Does that make sense? It's not some kind of guarantee, but there you can see that there's a general pattern there. This is what the Buddha taught. Okay. All right. So does this make sense about karma and how karma is related to rebirth? Have any questions about that at this point?
Actually, I just got my computer just shut down. Did that happen to everyone else's or just me?
Just you, I think.
Oh, I had to turn my computer off and back on. Okay. So I missed something.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Just wondering. That
Yeah.
was okay.
Okay. So this is a lot so far, but hopefully it's all fits together and you have some a little bit more coherent view. I had little bits and pieces of this, in sort of weird disconnected patches. And there's Lisa. Yes, you have a question?
Whoops, I'm unmuted. Yeah, well, I have a lot of thoughts, kind of hard to express, a lot going on there. But, especially because I keep kind of tangling with some issues in my own life and kind of not knowing what to accept. And I keep working with them, right? Yeah. Trying to live to the edge. But always what happens is I'm so aware of a tendency that annoys me, which relates to karma. And that's that I have this great longing to cram everything into a compact, linear, like space. And kind of because it lets me off the hook in a way. It's like, oh, well, I made this decision I'm not happy with. Although I know there's all these other conditions. I didn't have complete control. If I just blame myself, if I take on the responsibility, if only I tried harder, then I have this linear cascade. Does that make any sense?
Sure.
At all?
Yeah, we long for a linear causal explanation of things. This causes this. This causes poverty. This causes, marriages to fail. This causes, kids to have a very successful life. We're just looking all the time for that
right
sort of linear connection. And to the extent that there's a basic pattern or tendency in that direction, we have some sense of this unwholesome thing is going to have an unfortunate outcome. And this wholesome direction is likely, if we exercise and eat well, that doesn't mean anything in terms of, are we never going to get sick? Are we never going to get old? Are we never going to die? But in general, the tendency will be that we'll enjoy a better life, right? So we have some sense of that, but we would like it to be linear. We'd like it to be some sort of guarantee, basically. And so we cling to that idea. And
well, I kind of categorize things. I notice that I do that. It's like, oh, I am walking because I exercise. I'm very determined. I injured my shoulder. It's like, oh, I exercise. I'm not going to have surgery. That's not totally linear, but somewhat. And then there's these other categories of, oh, you know, when I was younger, if only I'd been able to do this, that I saw what I needed to do, but I couldn't do it. So I have these little categories of, I don't know, possible and impossible and just totally ridiculous sometimes. And I know at some level, some part of me knows that, oh, I'm just trying to cram this chaotic situation into some kind of template.
We're always looking for the causal explanations, because we have this this framework of explain, predict, control, and then assess.
Yeah.
Then things worked out, they didn't work out, so we need a better explanation, or we need better predictions, or we need more control. So that's a linear view, right? If we can explain something, we can then predict what's going to happen, and then we can control what's going to happen, and we can make the thing happen that we want to have happen. And then we check and see, oh yeah, no, that didn't work actually. So well, there must be something wrong with our explanation, or something wrong with our prediction, or something wrong with our ability to control things. And that's a very linear causal model. We all have these stories. We all have these stories. If only I had done X, Y would have happened. Or if you do this good thing will come out of it. And there's nothing wrong with that, because there is, it's sort of generally borne out in some, sort of mystifying way, in a way, not always turning out exactly the way we predicted, but at the same time, things generally go better. If we eat well and we exercise, things generally go better. And so we attribute a linear causal connection, right? And the truth is more complex than that.
I know that in my head. So what about volitional action? If karma is volitional action, doesn't that imply there's something that's non-volitional?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like, oh, when shit happens.
Yes, absolutely. There's accident, for example. We're all prone to creating accidents that are not a product of our volition, are not something we intended. So yes, of course. And there are accidents that just happen. Those are the conditions in the environment that's talked about, that also influence our experience, right? So this is the thing, is to keep noticing, oh, this is a story I'm telling myself about what causes what, about what the effects of this will be. If I do this, this will happen. And understand that that's a kind of magical thinking.
Well, I like that. And briefly, I'll just say, I have some particular stories about my childhood and family of origin, and it's really hard for me to deconstruct those stories.
Yeah, I don't think you need to construct them. I think you have to know that was in the stream, right?
Yeah.
Those are influences in the stream. They're no longer the conditions under which I'm living. But of course, I can construct them in my head and live there if I choose.
Right.
So this issue is extremely important. And I think we don't talk about it enough, how responsible we are for the contents of our consciousness. What we pay attention to is what furnishes our consciousness, right? That's the furnishings of our consciousness. So if we're watching a bunch of horror films, those are the images that are going to be in our consciousness, right? That's what we're going to be working with. That's going to be our experience. So we do have some responsibility, I think, for what we pay attention to, because that furnishes our consciousness. And it can be, a junk house there, or it can be this sort of spacious place where we're continuing to learn and grow and develop. Our universe becomes bigger, in other words, instead of more shut down, more closed in, more, these more well-defined stories that we inhabit. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I just need to keep hearing it.
Of course,
it erodes a little.
Yeah, this is right. Okay, Kim.
So it's always confused me that what is it that's reborn? And it seems we're talking more and more about something that sounds like a self. If it's not the body that's reborn, but there's this thing.
No, not a
But
thing.
I know you'd say that it's not a thing, but it's something.
We're really barking up the wrong tree there. No.
Okay. So what is it? What is it?
A flow, I would say, a flow of consciousness, a flow of being conscious, and the imprints in that flow. Right? So, for example, you might have a river that's full of abandoned cars and tires and things like that. You might have a river that's got sticks and twigs in it. You might have a river that has, a bunch of trout in it. Those are the things in the flow, right? Well, the tendencies are kind of like the parts of consciousness that actually flow with the consciousness.
At one time we talked about how some people now think that consciousness is outside of us and we come from our consciousness rather than the other way around.
Yes, the Buddha completely refuted that idea. You can believe it, but he scolded one of his disciples for saying that. Basically, there's a field of consciousness and we emerge out of it somehow. No, absolutely not. There's no consciousness outside of name and form. Does not exist.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, I know.
Keep working. I'll keep working.
This is why the Buddha said this is subtle, hard to comprehend, complex. I don't even want to teach it. Right? Okay, Chris.
Am I taking up too much time here? I know you're trying to get through.
No.
Okay, so we're holding this dual awareness of things as we experience them, and the awareness of the Buddhist understanding. So if I am working to change something, I want to change the severity and the nature of poverty in the culture, perhaps by helping to change structures of society, law, government. Obviously, I'm seeing causality there, linear causality. How would the Buddhist perspective inform that?
You'd be better off not to be seeing linear causality, but to understand reciprocal causation. So if you think about poverty, what's the single cause of poverty?
There isn't a single cause.
Exactly. And that's why all the silver bullets never, ever work.
Right.
It arises from causes and conditions that are interdependent, right? And that need to be addressed together in order to move things in a wholesome direction. So what you're trying to do is move things in a wholesome direction. And as you can see, that's complex. It's dependent on environment. It's dependent on historical forces, political forces, economic forces. It's dependent on biological forces. So it doesn't mean don't do anything. It means understand that if you go in with a simplistic idea of causality, you are going to fail and you're going to feel horrible about it. Right? Solutions have to come through education, through infusion, through political will, through housing, through, and it's very important to understand this. And your karmic intention is to try and be a benefit. So if you understand that, then you're looking for in what ways, given these causes and conditions, can I be a benefit in this situation?
Right.
Right? Okay, Darcy.
So I I was kind of intrigued. I have a couple questions in terms of Kim's question, what is being reborn? One is when you talk about it as a flow of consciousness, I'm wondering if there's anything that says that is it an individual consciousness or is it a combination of individuals' consciousness? And my other question is, what did you mean by the debris in it?
So the Buddha would say the afflictive emotions, the grasping, hostility, ignorance, that's what's motivating it. When those don't exist, then as he says, carpenter, the rafters have been broken, I will come no more into this life. So it's the afflictive emotion and those effects, karmic effects of those afflictive emotions, that is what propels consciousness.
And that's the debris, the afflictive emotions?
Yeah.
Okay. And is this consciousness that gets reborn a combination of consciousness from me and other people? Or is it just one?
Well, that's a weird kind of a question in a way, since you consider that this is a consciousness that has continued lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, thousands of lifetimes. So is it multiple consciousness or is it one consciousness? Is it individual consciousness? So the sense of it is it's participated in so many lifetimes that you can't say one and you can't say many. It is, in a sense, an individual stream from one lifetime to the next, but it's been many lifetimes.
And is there a finite number of consciousnesses that achieve manifestation?
Yeah, there isn't any sense of that. He deals with that a little bit later. We'll talk about that a little bit later, about the idea, the proliferation of, the population explosion. Where are these consciousnesses coming from? You have to understand that in Buddhist cosmology, we're talking about infinite multiverses populated by infinite numbers of beings. In the cosmology, you can ascend from the animal realm to the human realm in the continuation of a lifetime. You can come from some celestial realm into a human body. So there's this constant flow between these different realms. And I think that one of the most brilliant things is the Buddha understood that there were multiverses, millions of universes. And now scientists are going, oh, yeah, that's right. There are multiple universes. But he knew that before there was even astronomy, before there was even so much as a telescope. So that's what, that's in the Mahayana tradition in any event. Yeah. So it's mind expanding in a way, when you think about it that way. We have a very small individual human view of life and what we understand experience to be. It's very, very limited. And so these teachings of the Buddha sort of blow the top of our heads off because we're not thinking in these ways. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Janie, you had a question. You're still muted.
Oh, okay, sorry. Chris's question about like if somebody wants to eradicate poverty, and you said that you'd be pretty disappointed if you tried to do it in a linear way. I just was curious about that because I was just reading about this lawyer in the New York Times obituary who moved to New Orleans because he wanted to go to the place where they really needed help. And the guy committed suicide eventually. He also had cancer, and he did so much. I was just reading how much good he did, and I'm wondering, like, how does somebody end up who's, trying to do that kind of good by helping poor people in the justice system and stuff like that? And it was just, you were saying that you have to take all these different things into consideration. I just didn't completely understand what you were.
I don't know what was going on in his mind, but I could speculate that working as hard as he was working in the ways that he was able to work, he nevertheless became aware of the enormity and complexity of the issues, and it overwhelmed him. So, Pema Chodron says, put down your bucket where you are. Given this larger pattern of the development of karma, in this sense that in doing what's wholesome, in helping and supporting and benefiting life, you're creating the causes and conditions for things to be better for everyone. If you understand interdependence, you understand that. It doesn't have to be large scale. Be kind to the person sitting next to you. And it begins to permeate and perfume the universe you're in. And yes, can you make things perfect? Probably not. Because causes and conditions are complex, and because karmic seeds are continuing to reach fruition in everybody, and also the environment and other kinds of factors play a role. But he did what he was able to do. And if you hold on to a linear causal view, you will get wiped out by that kind of work. Anyway, in any event, does that make sense to you, Janie?
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to clarify it a little bit.
Yeah, it's important because it's, we keep landing on some sort of linear approach. Hey, enough. Jesus. It's our neighbor. Yes, she's walking. Just stop it.
Peg, when are you going to set up a Jizo cam?
She's pretty cute. She's a pretty good dog. Yeah. Jizo cam would be fun. Okay. So we're running out of time. I want to make sure that if anybody has any other questions, we have a chance to respond to them. We'll continue on from here, so you're not missing anything. We'll just continue on from here to talk about next time about the significance of right view, and how the denial of rebirth is considered wrong view, just flat out wrong view. You can hold open the question. You don't have to believe in rebirth. You can hold it as an open question in your mind. You can even set it aside and say, I'm not going to think about that. But the denial of it is considered wrong view. And we'll talk about that next time. So you can see this map is, sort of big, and we're filling it in as we go along. Yeah, but next week will be the last week with these teachings from Analavo, and then we will go into Infinite Life, Robert Thurman's book, a little bit, and talk a little bit about the Zen implications for what we're learning. Does it make sense so far? Does it seem like it's coming together in some way?
That doesn't seem to be making sense, doesn't seem to be the right word for me, but it's sinking in, it's settling. I kind of have to sit with it, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
For me, it was kind of heartening. Leslie.
Well, so you just answered my question then, because I'm interpreting this kind of in a way that I'd like it to make sense to me. So I just wanted to bounce it off you. So kind of what you're saying is don't sweat the decisions, the immediate decisions, because not one is going to be the one that's going to sink you.
Yeah. It's about this quality of paying attention. What are you bringing into your sphere of attention? What are you paying attention to? So one of the teachers says, pay attention to what you pay attention to.
Okay.
Because that's what populates your mind and your consciousness. So, and this is the problematic thing about sort of goofing off on the internet for 4 hours or so, you know, going down some rabbit hole, looking at spatulas or whatever. That's just me. But you see, oh, this is what I'm attending to. This is what's filling up my mind. And I'm responsible for this mind. No one else is going to come along and say, you have to do this, you have to do this with your mind. You're the only one who can actually have some management of your own mind. So, and I often think of it, you know, I've got this little dog. I had to train her. Otherwise she would just run around and be, you know, socially unacceptable. So I had to work with her, but I worked with her kindly, and I worked with her with, you know, kind of rewards in a way that shaped her behavior so that she could be, you know, welcome in people's houses and my own. But our minds are kind of like that, you know, so we have to watch what we're feeding them and watch the kinds of tendencies that arise out of what we're feeding them. Do we tend to be more anxious, more depressed, more worried, more, you know, whatever, more angry? Look at what we're feeding our minds and what we're paying attention to. There's such a wealth of reality that we are selecting, picking and choosing what we're attending to. And sometimes we're not aware that that's what we're doing. We think it's just happening, right? It just so happens that this is what I'm paying attention to. But we often are not taking responsibility for that. So it creates also a certain kind of grasping or a certain kind of clinging to things when we're not aware of what we're attending to. So, you know, we're in catalog seasons. One of my exercises is turning pages in a catalog and noticing what I'm attracted to and trying to figure out what is it in that thing. Is it a color? Is it the fact there's a horse in the picture? You know, is it what is it that is creating an attraction? And that's teaching me something about, oh yeah, I see, you know, this is how this works. And this is the mechanism that advertisers use to hook you, right? Hook your attention, which is what they're always trying to get. So, yeah, so if you want more on that, read Stolen Focus by Johann Hari, who's just a wonderful writer about this very topic, about the kind of intentionality that's behind the hijacking of people's attention. So, but we can, you know, it's one of the great things about meditation is we're recovering our mind and its capacity to pay attention. So that's very useful. Yeah. Okay. Oh, we're past our time. Oh, I'm so sorry. In any event, I will see you next week. We'll continue on with this teaching of Analavo. Was very heartening for me anyway. So,
do we have any homework?
Don't have any homework for next week. Just
okay.
Sit with these, you know, these concepts and see. Do you want? Let's see. Do you want a poem to go out on?
I love poems.
I'm just going to read this poem to you. Okay. This is called Greensickness by Laurel, Chen, and it's after Gwendolyn Brooks. My wild grief didn't know where to end. Everywhere I looked, a field alive and unburied. Whole swaths of green swallowed the light. All around me, the field was growing. I grew out my hair in every direction, let the sun freckle my face. Even in the greenest depths, I crouched towards the light. That summer, everything grew so alive and so alone. A world hushed in green. Wildest grief grew inside out. I crawled to the field's edge, bruises blooming in every crevice of my palms. I didn't know I'd reached a shoreline till I felt it there. A salt wind lifted the hair from my neck. At the edge of every green lies an ocean. When I saw that blue, I knew then, this world will end. Grief is not the only geography I know. Every wound closes. Repair comes with sweetness, come spring. Every empire will fall. I must believe this. I felt it somewhere in the field, my ancestors murmuring, go home, go home. Soon, soon. No country wants me back anymore, and I'm okay. If grief is love with nowhere to go, then, oh, I've loved so immensely. That summer, everything touched was green. Everything I touched was green. All bruises will fade from green and blue to skin. Let me grow through this green and not drown in it. Let me be lawless and beloved, ungovernable and unafraid. Let me be brave enough to live here. Let me be precise in my actions. Let me feel hurt. I know I can heal. Let me try again, again and again. Have a wonderful week, everyone. I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Peg. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Peg.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Maria.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.